Acts of the Apostles. When Saul arrived in Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. Then Barnabas took charge of him and brought him to the apostles, and he reported to them how he had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had spoken out boldly in the name of Jesus. He moved about freely with them in Jerusalem, and spoke out boldly in the name of the Lord. He also spoke and debated with the Hellenists, but they tried to kill him. And when the brothers learned of this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him on his way to Tarsus. The church throughout all Judea, Galilee, and Samaria was at peace. It was being built up and walked in the fear of the Lord, and with the consolation of the Holy Spirit, it grew in numbers. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the first letter of St. John. Children, let us love not in word or speech, but in deed and truth. Now this is how we shall know that we belong to the truth and reassure our hearts before him in whatever our hearts condemn, for God is greater than our hearts and knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence in God and receive from him whatever we ask, because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. And his commandment is this: we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. Those who keep his commandments remain in him, and he in them. And the way we know that he remains in us is from the Spirit he gave us. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, Lord. Jesus said to his disciples, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit. And every one that does, he prunes, so that it bears more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word that I spoke to you. Remain in me as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them in and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The Gospel of the Lord. All right, we have to take that dive right smack into the readings. Nothing comes first, right into the readings. In the Gospel today, we're going Gospel, and then the second reading, and then the first reading. In the Gospel today, Jesus talks about three parts of the plant. What are the three parts of the plant? I am the, you are the, you bear great fruit. Okay, so we have the vine, the branches, and the fruit. The vine, think of the vine, for those of us who did not have the privilege of growing up in Sonoma, California, or up on the great coast of the Great Lakes in Pennsylvania. We can think of the vine as something other than, it's probably best to think of the vine as the trunk of the plant, right? Not like the trunk of a tree, but it's the thing from which the branches are going to grow. Now, does the fruit grow directly off the trunk or the vine? No, it grows off the branches. Okay. Jesus is pretty clear. He's the vine. We're the branches. It's not up to him, the vine, to produce the fruit directly. He gives us the grace and the power to do that through the branches. He's the vine. We're the branches. Well, how does he define the fruit? Exactly. He doesn't define the fruit, right? It leaves it wide open. It leaves it wide open. So what is the fruit? How do you know it? Well, one way that we can get a handle on this is we turn to a debate that's been active among our evangelical sisters and brothers for a long, long time. Some of our evangelical brothers and sisters would say, you know what? To bear fruit is to make new converts, to bring people into the fold, right? To take people who aren't Christians and somehow draw them into the Christian community. Others among the evangelicals would say, well, that's kind of secondary, that's a thing, but primarily it's about our own conversion. And that we bear great fruit when each one of us becomes recommitted and takes that deeper next step into relationship with Christ. Okay, so it can go either way. So the gospel kind of leaves that big question wide open. What is it to be fruitful? What does a fruit look like? Well, how do you know? He doesn't really say. But there are two things the Father does with branches. What are the two things the Father does with branches? He can either prune them or what? Throw them away, right? Use them for fuel. So either prune them or throw them away. Which ones get thrown away, the good ones or the bad ones? The bad ones. Which ones get pruned? The good ones. So if you're pruned, it means that you're already productive and you're going to bear more fruit, okay? So a bunch of little insights, but still the big question of what about the fruit? Well, that remains unanswered until you get to the second reading. Second reading puts out a whole bunch of it there, and we know that it's probably either written by the same author as the Gospel of John or by a close disciple, because this word remain and abide are used so frequently in both readings. That's one of the tips. It's not used too many other places, but this author seems to use it. Now, in the beginning of the second reading today, the John, let's call him John, John says, now, love expresses itself how? Is it in words? No, it's not in words. How does love express itself? In deeds, right? And then it goes on to say, just before the close of today's second reading, that if we love one another, that means if we perform loving deeds for one another, then that means we're getting it right, which, put it all together, that means we are fruitful branches. If we express our love in deeds for one another, if we love one another as Jesus has loved us, and we model our love on Christ, and our love is fed by our conviction that Christ is the Lord and our Christ, if those good deeds, those loving deeds are rooted in what Jesus says we should do, and they're done for the sake of Christ, well then, that's the fruitful branch. Got it? You're fruitful branches when you perform loving deeds that line up with Christ's hopes, and whether or not you say it to yourself all the time, if you were really pressed, you would say, yeah, I do these because this is something ultimately I think that Jesus wants me to do. That's why I do it. That makes you a fruitful branch. That makes other people fruitful branches. Loving deeds performed for the sake of Christ. Whether or not we say, as you know, each morning when we get up and start to organize the breakfast table and get the last load of wash into the dryer and say, I'm doing this for Jesus. Well, who's going to say that, right? But we know that ultimately we wouldn't stop doing it because we're doing it for Jesus. It's consistent with our faith. What's the fruit? Jesus doesn't tell us. Well, John explains it in the second reading. But the problem is, Paul's situation in the first reading lays out a challenge for all of us. So what kind of a reception did Paul get when he went to Jerusalem? Did they welcome him with open arms? Is that what the first reading says? No, what did they do? What was their response to Paul? They didn't trust him. They were afraid of him. And well, they should be. Remember, it's hard for us to get our heads around just what a villain Paul was. Think of like domestic terrorists. That's really what he was. He was trying to blow up the community of the church wherever he went, and he didn't care how he did it. So who's the guy who blew up the building in Oklahoma? Timothy McVeigh. Right. So let's say Timothy McVeigh, he's gone to God now, I think, hasn't he? Well, wherever he is. Let's say that he was known as like a horrible domestic terrorist, and then he showed up like at the Rotary Club, right? And said, I really want to build up this community. How would you feel if you were a Rotarian and Timothy McVeigh showed up? You'd say, we'll get back to you, right? Completely understandable. That's what was going on with the community in Jerusalem when Paul showed up and he said, I want to do you guys a big favor. Hi, my name's Paul and I'm here to help. Thanks very much. But where was the fear arising? It was arising from their experience of what he had done before. And then where is it that he had his big conversion experience? Where was he going? Damascus. He was on his way to Damascus. And did he get knocked off a horse? No. There is no horse in that story that Paul gets knocked off of. He gets knocked onto his rear end, but he doesn't get knocked off a horse. And what was the voice that made that conversion happen? It wasn't that just God came along and knocked him on his rear end. It's that God came along and knocked him on his rear end and said to him what? Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And from that moment forward, he started to call Jesus those words that we've been using. From that moment forward, he started to call Jesus Lord, and he started to call Jesus the Christ, and he started to act like a good shepherd rather than a wolf. After the Damascus Road experience, was Paul a fruitful branch or an unproductive branch? He was a fruitful branch, but could the people around him see that? And there's the challenge. Jesus is the vine, we are the branches. To be a fruitful branch, as he asks us to be, is to be a person who does loving deeds that generate faith and hope and charity, to do loving deeds all the time that line up with Jesus' hopes that we do because we love Jesus. And as the poem says, overly quoted, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. The world is charged with the grandeur of God, and we can take that and say, you know what, the world is filled with productive branches, with fruitful branches. When we stop and see, wow, the challenge is for all of us, just like the people in Jerusalem, not seeing that fruitful branch for what it is. Now, they had their reasons, but for us, it's just probably familiarity, you know? Distance makes the heart go yonder, right? Familiarity makes us just think, wow, I don't see that anymore. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. The world is filled with fruitful branches, and that's you. And that's lots of people you know. And what we want to do is take Jesus' words and say, okay, let's get him out of the stratosphere and let's bring him right down into my heart right now. Lord, give me the grace to see all these fruitful branches all around me that I can sometimes overlook or sometimes don't see them for what they are. So the homework today is you got to name 5 fruitful branches. People who have these loving habits, these deeds that express devotion to Jesus Christ, that reflect conviction that he is Lord and he is the Christ and he is the Good Shepherd. I've been overwhelmed with the vision of fruitful branches here just in the last 5 days alone, right? And that's without even leaving the parking lot. Come on, the people who brought their kids to confirmation and all that entailed, and the kids who made their confirmation, you're fruitful branches. Are you perfect branches? Absolutely not. But are you fruitful branches? Yeah. All those people who signed up and did the Patriots ministry on Friday night, would they be doing that for a shoe store? No. They do it for the church because it connects to Christ. All you people who worked so hard yesterday, getting the place in order and filling that dumpster, right? Where's poor Mark Dorler? If Mark Dorler's back works for the rest of the week, it's going to be proof of the existence of a loving God. You should have seen him chopping out those stumps over in the triangle there on Colonial in Yorktown. Holy Moses. And poor Walt, he was in constant motion yesterday. And Joey, where's Joey? How many sticks did you carry, Joey? How many sticks? Tell me, you counted them yesterday. How many sticks? Yesterday he told me 114 sticks. And they were all bigger than he was. It was like powers and abilities far beyond those of the normal 4-year-old, right? All of those things are loving deeds committed ultimately as an expression of devotion to church, which ultimately is an expression of devotion to Christ. All the people who made confirmation happen, including those who fed the abbot, right? The world is filled with fruitful branches, but we lose out if we don't name them sometimes for what they are. So I tell you what I've seen without even leaving the parking lot, but your homework is to name 4 others, 4 places where you see that is a fruitful branch. That person is one fruitful branch. That person does things all the time that are loving deeds that line up with Jesus' hopes for the world. And then the 5th one is yourself as you look in the mirror and say, there's a fruitful branch. And be clear about the way in which you are a fruitful branch. Just one of the many ways in which you are a fruitful branch. Folks, the analogy is so familiar it can become irrelevant. When we stop and say, wow, Lord, let me see the world just today in terms of the vine and the branches and the fruit. Let me see it all in all its glory. Let me see the world for what it is, charged with your grandeur, filled with your fruitful branches. Name 5. One of them's you. How come? So it's about the people who habitually do kind deeds that maybe they think, maybe you think of it just what they do. Well, hold on a second. Stand back and notice it for what it is. It's a fruitful branch, not to be taken for granted. Imagine if the world didn't contain any fruitful branches. Yikes. But the world contains millions of fruitful branches, and we see them all the time. The challenge is to avoid the Jerusalem mistake and not overlook them and not mislabel them or misunderstand them. And it's proof positive that the Lord is alive and well and working through all of us. The vine doesn't produce the fruit. The branches produce the fruit with the help of the vine. That's you. That's me. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. The world is filled with fruitful branches. So let's just take a minute to name them and acknowledge them for what they are. So don't get out of your car until you name 5 of them. I don't care how many times you have to drive around the block, huh? And make sure that one of them is the person in the mirror. And be clear about one of those ways in which you are a very fruitful vine. And Jesus is saying, stick with it. And special thanks to all the people around here who, because you're fruitful vines, you're a great inspiration day after day after day in so many ways. Let us pray.